Hello, and welcome to today's session of Transform, the Changing Consumer. Thank you for joining us. My name is David Kenny, and I will be your host and moderator for today's panel discussion with our three guests, whom I'll introduce in a moment. So the Transform series is a new free online seminar series that explores the growing impact of digital transformation on business and society. We're covering a total of 6 areas, ranging from the future of work to smart cities and communities, the circular economy, and many more. This week, we're focusing on how digital technologies are changing consumers' experience and expectations. Our panel of speakers will be telling us a bit more about their businesses and how they're adapting to changing consumers' experience and expectations, the role that digital technologies play, particularly in light of some of the larger macro forces that are in play right now. To the audience, please ask your questions during the session using the Q&A function. You'll find it at the bottom of the screen. So please be aware that the chat function is disabled, so only ask your questions using the Q&A tab. I'll then compile the questions. I will ask our guests to address as many as they can in the time we have available. So looking forward to your questions, and remember, use the Q&A function. Okay. So I'm delighted today to be joined by 3 guests, or 3 panel speakers. And so what I'll do is I'll rather than you listen to me, I will ask them to introduce themselves. So guys, if I could ask you to activate your video and audio, please. Thank you. Thank you all right. Thank you very much. Welcome. So we'll just go around the horn and ask each of you to introduce yourselves. So Emer, if we can start with you, please.
Sure. Thanks, David. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Group Strategy and E-commerce Director with Kilkenny Group. Kilkenny Group, you're probably all familiar with. It is a company that employs over 350 people. We have 17 shops, 5 restaurants, and an online business. We're also the founders of the Champion Green initiative to support local. And I'm proud to say today that 72% of our suppliers are Irish. So that's a bit of a summary of, I suppose, where our business is at. And we'll talk about later how COVID has impacted that.
Thank you, Emer. And next, Laura, if I could ask you to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Good afternoon, everyone. I work as the marketing coordinator for Dundrum Town Centre, which is owned by the property company Hammerson, who are based in the UK. So I've been with Dundrum for about 1.5 years now, and I work with the centre management team on the marketing team there. So Hammerson, I suppose, technically I'm employed with Hammerson, purchased Dundrum Town Centre in 2015 in partnership with Allianz Ireland. So they are the operators of the centre, so essentially they're like our landlord. They own 21 flagship centres across the UK, France and Ireland, and they would see Dundrum as kind of the trophy asset of the flagship portfolio. So I suppose I work in retail marketing really, which has obviously been hugely affected by both COVID and Brexit in the past few months, over a year. So we can speak about that shortly.
Great, thank you, Laura. And finally, Chris.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I'm Chris Donnelly. I'm the CIO for BWG Foods. So we employ about 3,200 people between Ireland and the UK. We turn over about 1.5 billion. We have 1,100 stores that we supply in Ireland and 300 stores that we supply in the UK. And we operate multiple brands: Eurospar, Spar, Mace, Londis, Excel, and we have 3 distinct supply chains. So we have very different experiences of COVID. So we have a retail channel that has done incredibly well, and we have a wholesale channel, and then a food service channel. And food service in particular has been completely closed, and our wholesale division has kind of experienced somewhere in the middle. So we've seen the impact of COVID from kind of all sides, where the pressure has been increased demand and when the pressure has been no demand. So yeah, that's me.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. So as you've all sort of mentioned in your introductions, there are, I suppose, 2 big forces have hit businesses recently. So we've COVID and we've Brexit. Now, many businesses, but particularly retail businesses, I suppose, are viewed COVID-19 as a sort of a transformative disruption. So my question is, and I know you've alluded to it already, but Emer, if we could start with you, has COVID impacted your business, and if so, how so?
Absolutely it has, and the impact, I guess, last year was very sudden and very severe. So in March we made a decision prior to the announcement to close all of our locations for the safety of our staff and our customers. But what that meant then was the only channel through which the lights have been on is the online channel. And it has had a severe impact. Our revenue's down over 40% for last year. We've had to redeploy staff into different areas to support the online business, which is a positive. But we've also had to reinvent ourselves in other ways and come up with new means through which to access and service our consumer. Again, we would have, you know, a different demographic that would access our brand. So we needed to mind our older consumers. So we opened up channels and virtual shopping channels for those who would not be as familiar or as comfortable with the e-commerce side online. From an online side, then we had thankfully in 2019 been making changes to improve the online perspective for us and also to grow the market. Now, obviously, the change that happened was a decade of change in a year. So I'm not sure we were as prepared for what came upon us in March as we would like to have been. Like from our side, we would have had to scale up our warehousing side enormously because our revenues went up over 300% from an online perspective. So we had to scale accordingly for that. Then we had to do so in a safe way, increasing our shifts from a warehousing perspective and having overnight shifts again to adhere to the strict guidelines that were in place for COVID. And then we had to, I suppose, increase our staff in the online space. So we moved from 8 staff up to 18, and we were thankfully able to service customers via telesales channels remotely, etc. So the change has been significant. It has done, you know, it has obviously done huge, I suppose, damage to the revenue that we would make in a normal year. But having said that, you know, we were as agile as we possibly could be, and we've really increased our online side to try and recover as much revenue as we can and keep on as many staff as we can during the lockdown period.
All right, thank you. Laura, same question.
Yeah, so I suppose similar enough to Emer, we kind of, prior to the announcement last March, we obviously, a lot of our stores began to close as non-essential retail kind of came into place. And once the government officially announced that non-essential retail had to close, the majority of our stores closed. We have 160, just over 160 tenants in Dundrum Town Centre. So that includes, you know, everything from fashion to lifestyle to technology to supermarkets, and of course our F&B, our dining tenants, the restaurants and cafes, and some leisure tenants such as the cinema as well. So when non-essential closed, I think we have about 20 essential stores open right now in our third lockdown, which is obviously a huge drop compared to what we would normally have open. And we have about 16 restaurants and cafes offering delivery or takeaway at the moment. So I suppose from a marketing perspective, you know, our first, or even the centre management team, you know, our first priority was customer and staff safety. So we introduced a number of measures in the centre in preparation for the reopening, which initially we were told, I think, was August that shopping centres could open, but the government brought it forward to June, I believe, of last year was our first reopening. So, you know, we had, and we still have in place the one-way system in the centre, which we're encouraging customers to follow one-way system. Our security team have been amazing in facilitating, you know, people having to wear masks, which became mandatory, I believe, in August as well. We have an abundance of signage. Our marketing budget just totally flipped last year, and a lot of it ended up being on signage and, you know, getting the message out on our social media channels, on our website to customers that, you know, it is, we're doing all we can to keep the centre a safe space to come to during the COVID time, because we obviously didn't want to encourage crowds, but also wanted to let people know, you know, that we are still here for you in this time. And whether it was when the non-essential was open or just essential retail was open, that you know, we were there for the community when they needed us, I suppose.
Okay. And then Chris, just same question again to you.
Yeah, I suppose the first thing, we've always had a kind of a crisis committee, which is a subcommittee of the executive board, and we immediately started meeting daily, so right through Monday to Sunday for the first few weeks as we tried to work our way through this. The immediate thing we felt though was definitely a sense of responsibility, because being part of the food supply chain, and we had to keep going. You know, that was really essential to everybody. And also the fact that we have so many stores, 1,100 of them, and 90% of the population is within 10 kilometers of one of our stores. And when you're trying to stop people moving around and you're trying to stop people congregating, we had a huge part to play in making sure that the food kept flowing throughout the supply chain, and we were able to let people stay in their local communities and still not ever have an impact. And we didn't have one failed delivery. We didn't have any shortages in stock. And the issues at the start were absolutely, there's no question, hand gel, my God, it became the thing that everybody wanted to get. And PPE then for our staff as well became an issue, because, you know, we didn't want to take stock away from obviously the healthcare sector, but equally our staff needed to stay working in the warehouses. And while we could do the office functions remotely, the warehouses had to keep going. Guys, you know, and girls had to drive the trucks. We had to do the deliveries, and all of our staff and all of the shops had to work as well and support our independent retailers. Luckily, being part of SPAR International, which operates in 48 territories, and they have quite a big operation in China, we were actually able to start sourcing PPE directly from China with help of our colleagues in China. And they actually helped us get PPE directly to us quite quickly, which was essential to us. But yeah, the immediate things were like the parts of our business at day one that kind of closed down. That was the easy part, but keeping the supply chain going and keeping everybody fed, because we're also, you know, supplying food. We supply institutions as well. So one of our main contracts is with the HSE. So we supply the food going into the hospitals and care homes as well. We also supply the Irish Prison Service. And so we have to make sure the food's going in there as well. So the supply chain for us wasn't just about the shops, but also those big institutional customers as well. So I think for us at the immediate stage, that was it. The other thing we did, David, was we threw the strategy playbook out the window, and we categorized everything as now, next, and later. So now was what could be done between now and the next 12 weeks. Next would be anything from 12 weeks to 6 months. And then later was everything beyond 6 months. And we put teams working on those. We also cut through a lot of the red tape that we would have. We'd like to think we don't have a lot, but we do. We all have bureaucracy, but we cut through that. So that subcommittee didn't just meet and become a talking shop. We made decisions. So capital was redirected from certain projects and into digital projects. People were redeployed into IT to help us work with that. So we knew where we needed to put our resources, and we did that, you know, immediately, and we got things working, and we're never going to lose that now, next, and later approach to doing business. As Emer said about agile, I always try to run an agile team, but we try to become an agile company. And the one thing that we don't want to do, some of our colleagues around the world who came out of lockdown before us, Switzerland did at one stage before us, and our colleagues in SPAR in Switzerland said, who were part of the same group, they said the one thing they wanted to make sure not to do was to not lose the daily stand-up meetings, because they'd become so productive and had become so accustomed to getting contact directly with their teams. I've never had that in many years, but I was talking to my team on a daily basis. And even when we do go back to work, they're the kind of things we're never going to lose, that ability to interact with your team daily.
Sure. Interesting. And is this even a non-technical
oh, absolutely.
functions?
No, absolutely. So I mean, the ability for everybody to communicate, like Teams, we would have said the business would have taken a year to adopt to Teams, and they did it in 2 days. And everybody now, I mean, you know, when we do open the office again, things like our UC platforms, anybody from Cisco will be disappointed to hear, but there's things like that we just won't redeploy, and we just don't need them. Now, to be fair, we have some great partners out there, and 3 who provide our connectivity. They've allowed us to pause the contracts on things like that. And there's been a great sense of camaraderie, I think, in the Irish business sector. And businesses have helped out each other. Other retailers have helped out each other. You know, we've all kind of definitely pulled together, and that's been in a very real sense commercially as well. Like I said, said, been able to pause a contract until we see what's happening. Those things have been very positive.
Interesting. Just so you mentioned, say, international supply chain. So, Chris, if I just hold on to you for a moment. So we understand the impact, in an Irish context, but what about COVID in other markets, and how did that maybe affect business or supply chains?
Yeah, so one of the things we were very lucky to have in BWG, again, one of our primary brands is Spar and Eurospar. We were actually able to see what was happening through the Spar International Network a little bit ahead of time. So we were able to get our colleagues in Spar in China, and I'd been in China in 2019 with our colleagues over there. We were also able to get our colleagues in Spar Italy. They were able to let us know what was going to happen 6 weeks out, because they were always ahead of us. So China was a couple of months ahead of us, and Italy, as we all know, had a very tough time at the initial stages of COVID coming to Europe. So they were able to tell us what product sales went up, where the sales went up, and where to redirect our supply chains, what type of products we needed to be. So it was a great insight to have, and it was great to be part of that network. And those insights allowed us to react much more quickly than maybe some of our, and I wouldn't even call them competitors, because everybody, working in the food network, they all did something that we weren't really competing with each other in any great sense, but it gave us an insight there into what was about to happen. And that really helped us know the type of products, the paracetamol lines. Everybody was buying anything that contained that. People were buying anything that allowed them to help keep things clean. And it really helped us get those insights. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. A similar context, but slightly different question for you, Emer. COVID in other markets and that impact on you, but it's a different kind of an impact because you rely a lot more on footfall, I suppose, particularly seasonal footfall.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you speak to that in any way? And
Sure.
impact.
Yeah, I mean, like I alluded to earlier, like we lost 40% of our business, and that would be our bricks and mortar side. So international tourists would be huge for us, particularly across some locations. We'd be very focused on the tourist market because we serve both domestic and tourism. Again, that just completely fell off a cliff, and there was no returning to that. And I think we're all aware of that even from March. Obviously, we knew domestic would reopen, but definitely the numbers for tourism were falling dramatically from early March, where there was going to be no flights in or out, or if there were going to be, it was limited travel, particularly with the US rates as they were. So that was an immediate write-off to the business in that sense. And then I suppose building on Chris's point as well, I mean, there were supply chain issues even for our underlying suppliers, because when the China market closed down, essentially, think of all the packaging that comes into Ireland from China. There would be even components that would be used in making product in Ireland that comes from China. So it definitely also resulted in a slowdown in the supply chain. And building again, maybe on Chris's point, I think, again, data and insights is key in that space, because knowing what's ahead of you, the forecasting of what consumers will need, what their demand is like, etc., is fundamental to make sure that you are giving accurate forecasts to your suppliers in as much as you can, so that you're in a position to actually trade. And the same thing holds true when the domestic market reopened, because we all thought we were reopening for good. But then your demand planning based on a market that's open for good, but within a few months later, a few weeks later, again, it looked like another lockdown, and then it looked like a more serious wave was coming. So again, the ability to demand plan there, the ability to use insights to drive forecasts was key to manage that supply chain, because if you could give more notice to your suppliers, you certainly were able to guarantee the stock in place for the consumer.
Sure. And is it also your experience where you saw that kind of wider information sharing,
Yes.
with competitors?
Definitely. And I think, I mentioned earlier, like we founded Champion Green, which is the initiative to support local. I can definitely see, I mean, there's more of a camaraderie in the market. There's the support local piece. I think even consumers themselves, 43% more sales online this year went to Irish businesses versus last year it was 35. So you can definitely see there's a coming together, and that's a positive trend from COVID in the supporting of local communities and the supporting of local businesses. You can definitely see that on our side.
Okay, very good. rather than stay on COVID, because I think we've reached saturation point in the news and everything about it. If we shift gears into another elephant in the room, which is Brexit. And so Laura, if I could turn to you, similar question again as the COVID one. You know, has Brexit impacted the Dundrum Town Centre, and how so?
Yeah, so I suppose we haven't really seen the full effects of the impact it probably will have, due to the fact most of our stores are actually closed at the moment, and have been since, I think it was the 31st. So just as Brexit came in, the non-essential had to close. But I do know from speaking to a number of store managers that in the past few months to a year, you know, they were preparing for it. They've moved a lot of their warehouses and kind of manufacturing units to Northern Europe, so that it won't, you know, the products and stock won't have to come through the UK now. But I suppose it's difficult for me to comment on it fully because the non-essential is closed. And in terms of our supermarkets, the Tesco and M&S, Marks and Spencers that are open, we haven't seen a huge impact so far in terms of stocks. But again, it was just as it happened the week that Brexit came into force, and unfortunately non-essential had to shut down. So I know we would be similar to Chris and Emer, you know, we're in contact with our colleagues in the flagship centres in the UK and in France a lot. We have bi-weekly calls with them, and even not just from a supply chain kind of point of view, but more so an operations point of view. Just our centre management, you know, well, personally, I'm in touch with their marketing teams bi-weekly, and we would, you know, we've learned a lot from them. Back in March last year, we'll say, I think Ireland were maybe 2 weeks ahead of the UK. So once we went into lockdown, we were able to feed back our learnings and what worked and what didn't work to our UK colleagues. And again, France kind of then went back into the second lockdown, I think, before us. So, you know, we're in constant contact with them. And as even Chris mentioned, the stand-up meetings that they have, this was something we actually do in Dundrum pre-COVID anyways. You know, I'm sure plenty of you have visited Dundrum, but you don't really think of the operations and management side of it. And we do have a small team. There's a team of about 15 of us that sit in Dundrum, and our offices are located in the centre. So we would have a meeting every morning before the centre opens at 9, and we would run through the different teams, you know, whether it's cleaning, security, ourselves, the marketing team, the operations team, the retail business management team, who would be the one-on-one contact with our store and restaurant managers. So that was extremely important in COVID. We have somewhat shifted it online. So those that are we've kind of split the team. So those that are in the centre and those that are at home, we can still log in, and every single morning before the centre opens at 9, we still have that meeting. And I have to say that's definitely been absolutely crucial, just that communication, you know, between the teams at home and the team in the centre, and then the wider teams across the tenants. You know, it's definitely been crucial to keep up to date every day with the different changes and the reports that are coming through. So yeah.
All right, thank you. And Emer, same question, but it's probably too early to tell, is it? So, you know, when Brexit, you know, hit our shores, you know, what kind of impact did that have, and how are you managing it or overcoming the challenges presented by it?
I think by building on Laura's point, from a consumer point of view, certainly from bricks and mortar, too early to tell. Certainly because they're not open. And from an online point of view, our market wouldn't be massively pulling from the UK market. I haven't seen a huge dynamic or shift in that market just yet. What I am seeing, though, from maybe the supply chain side again is, you know, it definitely has caused delays coming through the ports, etc. Our underlying suppliers as well would be managing through probably a lot more administration and paperwork if they're sourcing some of their product, you know, through the UK. So I think there will be definitely a cost impact, thankfully not as negative as we had, you know, as what could have been hinted to if a deal wasn't signed, would have been far worse. But having said that, there's still a cost impact coming through and will hit the supply chain as a result. You know, and it's, I think people are still coming to terms with that. I think people are working their way through it. They've had to hire third-party agents, etc., which you wouldn't have had to do previously for UK product coming in. So it's a bit of a work in progress, to be honest. But it could have been worse, I would think. But it's definitely work in progress.
Sure. And Chris, it's same again to you. But if I could append, what role I think can technology play in Brexit, or certainly in your experience?
Yeah, the first thing we've noticed is that they've kept the supply chain flowing for food and pharmaceuticals. So we haven't been impacted, and that's been a conscious decision by the authorities.
Right.
But getting a server, as you talk, one of our servers for our new BI implementation, that got stuck for 4 weeks, and purely because of Brexit. So anything, as Emer said, if it's not food or pharmaceutical, it has been delayed. A couple of things that I suppose everybody's going to see over the next few months. There will be some cost impacts, like Emer said, and not even just for the extra paperwork. Orange juice, for example, Tropicana, that a lot of people love, that is going to be subject to WTO terms, which is a 12% hike in terms, just because it's mostly produced in the UK. Even though the oranges come in from other places, the rules are that that's where most of the value add is done. And what's a really interesting thing is, believe it or not, in a country like Ireland, we don't mill any flour in this country. So we grow lots of grain, but all of that goes to the UK to be milled. So it's going to be a challenge for us, and you're going to see bread prices potentially increase over the next while as that becomes more apparent. And what gets milled on the continent, they have a completely different grind of flour in France and on the continent, and doesn't suit the Irish tastes for the breads that we like. So things like that will happen. Technology has a part to play, absolutely. I mean, from our perspective, in this instance, it's much more about the forecasting and about understanding where the delays will be. We're actually, believe it or not, David, still implementing a huge ERP project. So we started the ERP project in October. And we're doing that all remotely with our colleagues all around the world. And that's the full digitization of our supply chain. So we're going to implement a full end-to-end deployment of the SAP solution. And that is purely about supply chain. It's about sharing, as Emer says, more information along the supply chain. And while, you know, it's hard for that to have an immediate impact in terms of Brexit, over time, we know that sharing information with our suppliers, with the manufacturers, right throughout the supply chain is where the real benefits will accrue over the future. We're also going to implement this year an artificial intelligence solution in our B2B platform. So most of our sales from a B2B perspective goes through e-commerce, our own platform that we developed in-house, and we're going to plug in an AI component to that. And that's been driven by Brexit and driven by COVID in particular, because you're now in the zero-based models, because there are no prior models on which to predict the patterns that are going to happen in this particular scenario. So you need something like AI that can actually, you know, the AI we're looking at will take in 260 data points to augment the transaction level data. So it'll go right down to sensing the local social media sentiment to understand, are there birthday parties? Is there a game in the local area? And trying to predict at a micro level what the product should be that's supplied to that particular store. So that's where the technology can certainly have a big part to play. But at the moment, the technology is more of a barrier than a benefit, because some of the supply chain systems are so rigid that I'm aware of some of the Northern Ireland retailers are having to, they spent years consolidating deliveries so that we would bring multiple suppliers together onto one truck. But now their systems can't handle with individual paperwork per manufacturer. And they're actually asking the manufacturers to deconsolidate and to start sending individual trucks over until the systems catch up being able to handle that. So the technology, in some ways, while it can be great when it's there, to get there is a real challenge at the moment.
Sure. Okay. A couple of things you mentioned there, more the consumer facing side of technology. So you're talking about sort of socializing some of your data, like using social media data and customer profile data. And I'm just wondering, I will say this so more generally then, if we can obviously consider COVID and Brexit, because they're very much a la mode, but just generally or wider, what kind of digital commerce trends I think do we see coming in, say, in 2021, do we see ahead
Certainly,
of us?
certainly for food. I mean, we've deployed a new technology in a store in Galway and a store in Dublin, MishiPay. It's completely frictionless technology. So it's actually scan, pay, and leave. Can't use scan, pay, and go because that's trademarked by Amazon. But scan, pay, and leave. But basically, you can download the app or use the solution on your phone, scan all the goods. You can tot up your bill, and you can walk out. You pay on the app. You don't go near a single employee. You don't go near a single checkout. We had been looking at this for about 18 months, but we immediately brought it in because of COVID as an opportunity to really help stop people congregating in queues, because once you get queues, you get transmission. And the shop we deployed it in Galway is right opposite the hospital, and we heavily promoted it to the hospital staff so that they could not only avoid risk, but also get in and out of our shops much more quickly. If somebody, and then the ability to order if you could order your sandwich, you don't have to queue at the deli counter. If you could order your coffee, you don't have to queue at the coffee machine. And if you could pay as well, now you don't have to queue at the till. So we see that as a real, and we're going to build out from that, David, is the ability to order at home from the same app, pay at pump when you're in your car and you fuel. I mean, you can fuel in the forecourt and again, not have to go in. So, but for us, it has to be all channels, because we're never going to see a major. I mean, Emer and Laura would have much more experience in the B2C, and they will see much larger portions of business move online. Food is a long way. Bricks and mortar is here to stay in food, and when you can see Amazon opening physical stores to get into that sector, food, just the service fees are higher than the margin in the food sector, so it's never going to fully move online. But an omni-channel experience allowing consumers to take online, in store, and definitely that blended retail is definitely a trend we're going to see.
Sure. And Emer, is that something you're looking at too, particularly for example, when you see a drop off in footfall, tourism or tourism dependent sectors, for example, and is that something that Kilkenny Group is looking at?
It is. I mean, building on Chris's point there, it's about looking at the entire omni-channel here, and there is a blended approach. Some people call it digital. I think at this stage it's the physical and the digital meeting. So it's that seamless interaction and knowing your consumer at all the different touch points and providing them with what they need. I think as a result of COVID, we'll definitely see a continued increase in cashless transactions and a desire to move in that way, in that digital format. I think that social commerce, again, is becoming bigger and bigger. And I think that's going to be a huge means through which we're selling to consumers both now and into the future. And again, knowing your consumer all along the way. So the data, guys, again, I would say is huge in here, because again, knowing the consumer that comes into the store, what they want, they're, again, are they going to be as time sensitive as they were before? Have they got a little bit more time back after COVID? Have people reassessed their lives? I think they're going to be changes. Like, retail will reflect a consumer's life at the end of the day, and how they're feeling at a point in time. Retail will also probably need to continuously offer value along its digital chain as well, so that consumer, it's probably more value conscious now. They need to trust you as much as possible as well, and they'll have learned that via COVID, what brands looked after them, what brands didn't. So I think there's a lot of different components that there's the digital means through which we access the consumer, but then there's also how the consumer is living their life and being able to replicate and give them what they want across all the areas of the channel. Sure. Like, one other key example I think that comes out for this year that we're all expecting to come out of COVID is decentralization. So a move from the cities to local areas, etc. Now that changes completely the dynamic. That'll change target consumers, and you'll see local becoming more important for consumers again, and potentially maybe our cities, back to the Amazon point, maybe the city centre stores just become smaller and you're serving the consumer more via online, and they're using the store as just a physical presence to come to walk into and become acquainted with the product. So there's a lot of questions that are coming from COVID, and I think there will be a lot of change to life as we know it, particularly with decentralization looming on the cards as more people work remotely.
Sure. And Laura, I suppose, is decentralization something you'd like to see? So just similar question to you, Laura. And I know yours is different because you, in the center, for example, what technologies or consumer-facing technologies is Dundrum looking at or implementing or considering in 2021 that will help retailers, for example?
Yeah, so I suppose in the last year we've seen a lot of our brands bring out their own kind of new maybe apps or digital platforms or a way of, different touch points like that connecting with the consumer, but it would always kind of relay the consumer back into the store somehow. So just for example, the likes of Butler's Chocolate Cafe, I know they've launched an app that consumers can go online and order. So it basically emits the queuing process, because the queue sometimes can be very long for butlers, especially at lunchtime and that. So, just kind of examples like that. I know some of our beauty brands have come out with, virtual kind of consultations online and things like that. But again, it does bring the consumer back into the store. In terms of Dundrum, we do have a Dundrum Plus app, which is our consumer app. And pre-COVID, this was something we launched, I think, in November of 2018. And we've seen the numbers and the downloads really increase in 2019 was really positive. And then unfortunately when COVID hit, consumers weren't in the centre as much, but we would use that app we would team up with tenants and we would offer, some particular offer in store. So it's kind of that, just adding more value to their experience in the centre. And that kind of surprise and delight element, which is something that we're really trying to focus on. Again, that experiential kind of experience for someone that just comes to the centre and then they might get a notification on their phone to say that they could get a free donut at Offbeat Donuts, for example. And it's a simple mechanism we have. It's just once the consumer has the app downloaded, they just go up to the store and then they scan a QR code. So there's not too much physical kind of contact. So we did have to pause that a good bit last year, but it's something we picked up at the end of last year and saw really positive results. And it's also something that I think our tenants and the brands really appreciate. It's just another platform to get their brand out there and get, our customers kind of involved, and that's kind of, just more involved in it. And then again, I suppose looking at technology and how as a centre we've used it, back, I think it was about 6 months ago now, we introduced a feature on our website and our app called Crowd Checker. So this is a new feature. It hasn't been introduced by any shopping centre in Ireland so far. And it basically looks at the live footfall data and gives the consumer an idea of how busy the centre is. So it's broken down into 4 different thresholds on the live data of the kind of how busy the centre is at that time. And it's updated every 15 minutes. So that was a huge thing that we launched last year across our website and app, and got really positive national coverage on it, which was something we were really proud to introduce, and hope to see more brands and retailers or other centres even introducing it, because it was definitely something that we got a lot of positivity around Christmas, especially people, while they kind of wanted to go to the centre and experience their Christmas shopping day out, and they were obviously a bit apprehensive, and maybe they hadn't been in a shopping centre in a year or so. So we felt it was something that our digital team in the UK helped us roll out at a local level, that really kind of just added that extra safety element, I suppose, to consumers who might have been anxious.
And one question I was going to ask was, assuming a return to what we call the old normal, what could retailers do to drive or enhance digital engagement? But I suppose some of the implementations that you've done in response to COVID are and this is for all 3 of you, are probably there in place. So irrespective of COVID, it's probably, for example, Chris, in your case with the mobile payment, that just increases throughput. And so irrespective of the health considerations or issues, it's still something that you would probably have gotten around to eventually, say.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, we're primarily, our business is in the convenience sector, and we've a simple motto: if you're going to be in the convenience sector, you need to be convenient. So,
Right.
like and convenience is definitely going to change. I mean, to follow on to Emer's point, while a lot of our stores are doing incredibly well, our stores in city centres are in serious difficulty. So it's not all parts of the food sector that are still doing well. Dublin city centre is, as everybody knows, is just zero footfall almost, and that some of that will be permanent, because a lot of businesses will go back to more mixed working, with some days at home and some days. So the footfall in the cities will never go back to what it was. But I do. I mean, Conor Sheehan had a great piece on that from DIT in relation to cities will go back to what they were originally designed to be, with speciality stores like Paris, that you'll have an envelope shop and a pen shop, and they'll just go back to what they were. You know, the modern view we have of the city is very different to what it was throughout most of history. But yeah, you know, those things are definitely technologies that are going to be in place in our business now and for the future. I think kind of everybody would have said from an IT perspective, you know, the CIO of the year last year was COVID, and a lot of these technology trends were just literally ready to happen. What it did was it either brought them forward in the plan, or it released the capital to invest faster. I mean, there's very little of this that, you know, Laura's piece there about the, you know, even footfall and footfall tracking, and, you know, all those things they've had a new use case. They were always important, but there's new use cases for these technologies and new ways. So look, one of the things we've always known is that technology was going to become a much bigger part of the basis of competition in retail, and COVID has only hastened that.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. So actually, before we came on, just when we were talking off air, a couple of other sort of topics came up, and one. So this is going to serve as a sort of a public service announcement for anyone listening. But Emer and Chris, we were talking about security, right? And if you want to give a couple of anecdotes or information on you've seen a spike or a rise in is it fraud or online and offline security issues?
Yeah, I suppose like like every sector has digitally transformed, and criminality is no different. You know, it was only, I picked up only last week on CNN that the head of Interpol said the single biggest threat facing the world at the moment isn't COVID, it's cybercrime, because with criminality now moved off the streets, it's all moved online, and it's an ongoing and increasing threat. We have seen a spike. Our SOC has seen a huge amount of increase in potential threats. We've really upped our game. But last week we had the first P1 security event I've had in 5 years. Now, like I said, the SOC intervened immediately. The issue was dealt with, and the perimeter was hardened yet again. But we now know that for the next 4 weeks, we are now up the list again on attacks, because we will on the dark web, we will be seen as there was an exploit, and those things are absolutely, it's a very serious part of our business now, and for our customers as well, the retailers.
Sure. And Emer, is there information that consumers, is there anything they should know, or the basics they should do to keep themselves safe, protect themselves online, offline?
Yeah, I think again, it's knowing who you're purchasing from, and established retailers probably have an established retail presence for quite a while. So again, they probably have more robust procedures in place. My nervousness here would be, again, on new retailers coming online and maybe underestimating the level of threat that could exist in this space if you're not fully prepared, because there's such an amount involved in an online journey, from your supply chain, from delivery, managing consumer expectations, all these things. It's really a message to businesses, I think, not to underestimate this space. And as Chris alluded to, it is the new area of criminality, so you need to be prepared for it, and you need to make sure that you have the best team in place to manage it, to protect consumers, because that is ultimately our job as well.
Sure. Okay, great. Thank you. Guys, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. I think we'll bring the discussion to a close, but there's questions coming in from the audience. So some of them are directed at individually. Some of them are more open. So Let me see here. We have so question. So it says mentioned supply chain issues from the perspective of slowing deliveries. Has there also been issues in trying to keep up with huge increases in e-commerce sales, especially for some Kildare village shops who would have been more focused on in-store sales, and how have some been dealing with this? So that's a question from Ellen. Ellen, I'm not sure who that's directed at. So maybe we'll come back to that one. Sorry, Chris, this is for you. Does Chris see the supply chain issues and increased costs of some imported products as an opportunity for Irish producers? And will BWG be looking for more Irish products to replace some of these as a result?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. We're all, you know, Europeans, and we traded as well with the UK. We've an operation there, but the door is always most open for an Irish supplier of any product in our supply chain. It always has been. It absolutely always will be. And Emer said it, and it's so true. Consumers are far more inclined now to buy Irish than ever before, and we were always very brand loyal to buying Irish. But there are massive opportunities there. Like I said, flour is there, orange juice. I'm only picking two that we know there's immediate challenges with. There are going to be multiple opportunities for Irish suppliers to get into the food supply chain and other sectors, but definitely within food, where we are very interconnected with the UK. There are ample opportunities. There's not a retailer in Ireland, and I don't just mean this from BWG, every retailer and wholesaler in Ireland has the door most ajar to an Irish supplier. So those doors are always open, and they'll only be more so now.
And that's the case for you, Emer, as well. It is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely the case. Yeah, we give everyone a chance and an opportunity there, and the door is always open.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Now, question for Laura. We know consumer behaviors change significantly, shopping online, etc. It's almost a given. What does this mean for shopping centres in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I suppose the main consumer behavior change that we've seen in the centre since reopening last June was that people are definitely coming back to the regular physical shops, and they're definitely spending there. So I think the main trend that we saw was that people were spending less dwell time maybe in the centre, but definitely spending more. Especially last Christmas, you know, some of our shops had the best kind of trade that they have ever had while in Dundrum, which was really positive for us to see. So I suppose as a centre, as the marketing team in Dundrum and I know across Hammerson, you know, we're really looking at kind of having that surprise and delight element to centres, and you know, something that when the consumer does come back out and you know, we are kind of more towards the back towards the normal side of things again. I suppose that it's important to remember that it's about, you know, evolving, I suppose, and embracing new ideas as a centre and always kind of making the consumer's experience better. So that's kind of what we're aiming to do at the moment. You know, usually we would run a calendar of events, particularly seasonal events, which, you know, it's just very difficult for us to even plan at this stage. But our focus is on, you know, making sure that the consumer does leave with a positive experience, and that, you know, that they're comfortable coming to the centre again. So we'll probably keep the measures that we have in place at the moment, and obviously follow all of the government guidelines as we have been so far. But that's looking forward into the far future, maybe.
Sure.
Yeah. The clearer future. That's what we're aiming to do as a shopping centre.
Okay, thank you. Question for Emer. So you mentioned decentralization. Do you think this will help accelerate e-commerce adoption?
Yeah, I think COVID has certainly shifted in a positive way towards e-commerce, but I also think that, and like we mentioned, there's been a decade of change in a year. So I do think there will be definitely more people buying online than we'd seen previously. Having said that, the predictions are that bricks and mortar continues to have a presence, and it'll be a blended approach. And I think as well, something key, like from, I think Goodbody released yesterday, you know, that in Q4 of this year, they're expecting a huge trend of spending from Irish consumers and the anxiousness to dissipate a little bit. So we're expecting a return to the 1920s in Q4. And again, that potentially more purchasing in the bricks and mortar side, using online to do the research as they would have before. Like our stats would show that over 70% do their research online, and then they might purchase in a physical store. So I don't think physical stores are going anywhere, but I think decentralization will push people to buy more locally in physical stores rather than physical stores going anywhere.
Sure.
And, you know, and I think online will also benefit from the same.
Okay, thank you. Some nice feedback. It says fantastic and detailed presentation and insights, really informative. Thank you all. So thank you, Chris Clancy. So a question for Chris. So I suppose in the context of, I mean, it applies to all of you, but it's directed at Chris. Since consumers are commuting less, how have consumer patterns changed? For example, less purchases as a result of fuel purchases. So if we're all locked down,
Yeah, so like I said, our forecourts and our city centre stores would have been the most negatively impacted. Rural stores have done well, but in the suburbs, I mean, the coffee sales, a cup of coffee would have been, you know, that would have been the city centre stores, but it's urban stores now. We all still like a nice bean to cup of coffee, you know, the Tassimo and then espresso only goes so far. So you'll see people going out for the coffee in the rural stores, and so the patterns of sales are similar. One of the other interesting ones, though, and not to say it in a negative way, of more consumption of alcohol, because there hasn't been massively more, but when it's moved to off license and to our stores as opposed to in the bars, we've seen a much more premium purchase. So people have really premiumized their purchases at home. So if you were paying 12 or 16 euro for a gin and tonic in one of the bars in the city centre, you're suddenly seeing that, you know, you can buy the most premium gin for maybe 45 or 50 euro a bottle, and that's the equivalent of 3 drinks when you're out. So we've seen a real premiumization of alcohol in particular. People have really traded up in those purchases in particular.
So we're sophisticated now.
We are very much so.
Right. So bad news for Dutch Gold then, I suppose. All right. Okay. Question for Emer. So have you considered, or do you offer virtual personal shopping to coincide with telesales for older customers? I think you did mention that. So
yes.
Older customers, so that was something, because you know, in terms of your segments, that's an interesting one. The slightly maybe older segment, or those who are maybe less or more averse to technology or less tech savvy, I suppose.
Yeah, we've definitely seen, you know, a drive towards telesales from maybe an older segment. Again, they find comfort in talking to somebody and talking through maybe the different options that are available, or buying gifts, etc. So that's definitely, I think, worked very well for that segment. And yes, there is virtual shopping available via that means as well. So
okay, great. Question for Laura. Do you think COVID has driven the consumer to be more focused on what they actually want to buy, i.e. they know what they want to buy when entering Dundrum and may just want to confirm sizing, etc.? Is this likely to continue post-COVID?
Yes, I definitely think COVID has had that effect so far. You know, it very much kind of felt like people knew what they were coming in to buy, and they were just wanted to buy it, maybe take a look at it physically before. Or there's always the convenience side of things, you know, like we do have, while we're not located in the city centre of Dublin, we're just south of it, and we do have a huge catchment area there, so we do have a huge local community around us, and people that would be very, I suppose, feel very strong about that. So we definitely felt as a management team that people were, you know, they kind of had their list nearly, and they knew exactly what they were coming in to buy. But again, the convenience side of it, whether that will stay or not, it will be interesting to see. I do feel, you know, history always repeats itself, and like, while we mightn't see that trend coming, or that we might see that trend staying for quite a while now, I do feel in the future that it will return to, you know, the typical kind of browsing and day out with friends, or maybe just catching up over food and having a browse through shops, whether you know, they intend to purchase or not. You know, the intent to purchase is definitely there when consumers visit the centre, but whether that will come back and be more of kind of a lax approach to going shopping.
Sure.
I personally think it will come back, as I said, but it will just be interesting to see, and hopefully the fact that unfortunately we lost a couple of brands last year, but by Christmas our leasing team were doing amazing work around the clock. They managed to fill the centre again by Christmas time, and we were lucky enough to offer the space to I think it was 3 or 4 Irish brands, which was especially important to us to fill it with homegrown brands. And obviously there was the huge drive for shop local and shop Irish at Christmas time, so it was really good to see that. And we had the likes of the Guinness store came in, and they had a pop-up in the middle of the centre, and they kind of offered bits that you couldn't really purchase online, and they had a special offering for a personalized pint glass that the consumer could actually make there and then themselves and take home with them there and then themselves. So I think it's really things like that that brands have to look towards, especially to get the consumer back into their stores and back shopping for the kind of I suppose non-essential retail.
Sure. Okay, thank you. So one final question, and I'll finish on this, and then thank you to everyone who submitted your questions. Emer, it's for you, but I suppose Emer, you can answer it first. But if Chris or Laura, if you want to come in afterwards, what do you think is the most common reason for customers learning about goods online but choosing to instead execute the purchase in store? So Emer, what you were saying earlier. So this this matrix of research online, purchase offline, or research offline and purchase online, so that there's that combination of behaviors that consumers can do. And her question is, why do you think they're doing it?
I think our consumers now are savvy, and I think they want to be well informed, so they do their research before they make their purchase. I think then as part of that, if it's convenient to do so and a store is nearby, and if Sealing the Deal is actually looking at the product, then I think that would definitely be a reason why they would move towards purchasing it in the bricks and mortar to make sure it's the right product rather than waiting for it to. I think that's a component. I also think, like in any research that's been done on Irish shoppers in particular, we are literally a generation of shoppers that I suppose even in the past, there's a huge shopping habit. It's one of our biggest pastimes. So if it's one of our biggest pastimes, again, there's a desire to go into the bricks and mortar side, which is really building on what we've said already. The future is a blended approach of both e-commerce and physical. Consumers will want both, and they will certainly want to, I think, seal the deal and see the product in the bricks and mortar store where they can also.
Sure. Okay. So I think you're both in agreement, Laura and Chris. Not great. Okay.
Yeah, no, just very quickly,
Yeah,
Emer's
sure.
right. The experiential part of retail is massive. And
Yeah.
like Laura said, people meeting up, experience and social side of retail just can't be recreated online.
Absolutely, yeah.
No matter how good the technology. Right. Yeah. That was wonderful. Thank you very much, all of you. That was great. Audience, thank you very much for listening. So I'm just going to wrap this up as we come to the end. So, yep, thanks again, Emer, Laura, and Chris, for your insights and for sharing your knowledge and your insights. And it was very worthwhile. To the audience listening in, just to let you know, as you know already, I'm sure, so Transform is going to continue. It's going to run all week at the same time each day, so 1 to 2 p.m. All the way up, including Friday. Tomorrow it's part of our SDG 4B series. So the speaker tomorrow will be Petra Kinklova, and she's going to be discussing SDG 9 and how UNIDO are helping to champion that goal. On Thursday, we will be joined by Emer McCarthy, who's the founder of Insight Designed. We've David Cullen, CEO of Opinions, and Grace Binchy, who's a consumer insight specialist at Board Bia. So that's on Thursday. And then finishing up the week then on Friday, we have a homegrown organic panel for you. It's our very own Professor Theo Lynn, Dr. Pierangelo Rosati, and Dr. Gary Sinclair. So once again, I want to thank our panelists, Chris, Emer, and Laura, and thank you everyone for attending and participating. Stay well and goodbye.
Thanks.
David.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Bye.